Hi, I'm Leo, the person behind Iggy Patterns, and today we're gonna sew the Hanni Dress. It's a vintage-inspired wrap dress with a beautiful half-circle skirt. It comes in two different length options. Today we're gonna make the longer one, but you can easily adjust the length to your liking. You can also make a top and simply cut the front piece below the vertical darts. And you can even add some sleeves, so you have some design variations. The way the dress is constructed, you simply pull it over your head. It has no usual side seams. So you bind the front in the back, and then the back piece comes to the front and is tied here. So it's quite adjustable. I still recommend making a quick mock-up just to check the fit and maybe make small adjustments. Especially the waist seam should really sit at your natural waist and not higher or lower. There are two different finishing options. As you can see here, the bias binding is still visible. And here is the clean finish where the bias binding is folded to the inside and then top stitched. You need quite a lot of bias binding, so I really recommend store-bought bias binding, but you can make your own. I personally don't enjoy making my own bias binding, and as you need quite a lot, I really recommend buying bias binding. And other than that, you don't need any zipper or buttons, so I would say it's confident beginner friendly. So let's begin. After cutting out the pattern pieces, we begin by stay stitching the edges. This helps to prevent the fabric from stretching out while we're working on the garment. Always sew from the outside towards the center and repeat it on the other side. The same goes for the skirt pieces, just stay stitch from the outer edge towards the center back on each piece. Here I'm just demonstrating the difference it makes. Set your machine to a straight stitch of about 2 mm length, and then we sew 8 mm from the edge and stay within the seam allowance so the seam is not visible later. Next, we're going to sew the darts, so make sure that you transfer all important notches and lines to the wrong side of the fabric. If you need more tips, you find them in the manual. And then we start with the back darts. Fold the fabric right sides together, align the dart legs, and then we start sewing from the outer edge. Don't forget to backstitch, and then we sew slowly towards the dart point where we leave long tail threads and tie them into a small knot by hand. For the front piece, we'll start with the sideways dart. These darts begin very close to the armhole, leaving only a small amount of fabric at the beginning of the seam. But don't worry, this can feel a little unusual. Simply align the dart carefully and start sewing as close to the edge as possible. This is how it should look like, but don't worry if it's not perfect, because later with the bias binding it will even it out a little bit. Then we're sewing our remaining darts. Once all darts are sewn, we are going to press them all towards the center. Now we come to the skirt pieces. I'm sorry I'm not showing it here in the video, but simply place the two skirt pieces right sides together and align the center back seam, and sew with 1 centimeter seam allowance. Press the seam allowance open and then mark the center back on the back bodice and place it right sides together on the skirt piece, aligning the center back points, and then you start aligning the edge. The skirt edge is more curved than the lower edge of the bodice, so distribute the extra fullness evenly between all the points and use a few extra pins or clips if needed. And then we sew with a 1 centimeter seam allowance and press the seam allowance upwards towards the bodice. Now we close the shoulder seams by placing the front and back pieces right sides together and sew with a 1 centimeter seam allowance. Afterwards, press the seam allowance open. The shoulder seams and the waistline seam will be visible on the inside, so we are finishing these raw edges with a overlocker or a zigzag stitch. Now is a good time to check the fit. Carefully try the dress on and wrap the front piece towards the back and pin it in place, and then the back piece towards the front. The center back and the center front edges should have a little gap, otherwise you can't really tie the dress tight later on. So if they overlap, you can remove some width by drawing a new parallel line to the original seam and remove some fabric. Then we check the length of the dress. If you like it, we start by hemming the front piece. It has a straight edge, so we do a simple double folded hem. Hemming the skirt can be a bit more tricky. So we sew a straight stitch all along the edge of the skirt with a 5 millimeter distance towards the edge. Then fold the edge to the wrong side by 5 millimeters, press, and then fold it again by 5 millimeters. Then we sew it in place. I'm sewing from the wrong side as it's a bit more easy to catch everything, but you can also sew from the right side. My bias binding is not the perfect color match, so I want the front ties to be out of the main fabric. So I cut 2 strips and fold them towards the center, wrong sides together and press. Then I fold everything towards the center crease, press and fold it another time. Finish the 4 open edges as shown in the video. Then sew very close to the edge to close the opening. I put some fabric underneath my presser foot so it helps my machine guide the ties a little easier. Now we're finally attaching the bias binding. In this video I'm showing you a quick method, but if you prefer another method, that's totally fine. We start by attaching it to the side edges on the front and back piece. Open the bias binding and encase the raw edge of the fabric inside, making sure that the edge is reaching the center fold of the bias binding. Use pins or clips to keep it in place if that's easier for you, and then slowly start sewing at the hem. Don't forget to backstitch, and then always double check that the fabric is still in the middle of the bias binding. Also check that the back of the bias binding is caught in the stitching. Then we fold the bias binding towards the wrong side, press, and then top stitch. Repeat that for all 4 edges. Measure 45 centimeters from the beginning of the bias binding and mark this point. Starting at the marked point, enclose the raw edge of the front piece inside the bias binding using the same sandwich method as before. Continue over the armhole, over the shoulders towards the back edge. You can also use pins or clips if you prefer. Now we finished the open edge of the bias binding the same way as we did before with the ties. From this point on, we sew the entire tie closed and sew one continuous seam all over the armhole, the shoulder seams, until the end of the back piece. I find it easier without any pins, but feel free to use as many as you need and go very slow around the curve as the fabric might slip out, and make sure that you catch all layers, especially the back of the bias binding. I have the wrong side facing upwards so I can see the darts and the shoulder seams and make sure that they lay flat. And then repeat the same for the other side. Now we finished the neckline with the same method. So we start at one shoulder seam and sandwich the open edge between the bias binding. Start sewing and don't forget to backstitch. Go very slowly around the curve. And once you reach the beginning again, leave a small overlap and fold the open edge towards the inside so you have a clean finish. Now we fold the entire bias binding on all edges towards the inside and press it well, pin it in place. And then we're gonna top stitch all the edges so we have a clean finish. Now we top stitch all around, securing the bias binding on the inside. We cut the 2 ties that we sewed before out of the original fabric in half, so we get 4 of them. And then we place the unfinished end between the fabric and the bias binding, roughly 1 centimeter inside, and make sure it's secured. You can also use some additional stitches to make sure that it's nice and secure. My machine was struggling a little bit with the layers, but it's fine. I then place the needle inside and lift my presser foot and pivot it around. And then I took the other fabric tie with the raw edge and aligned it with the waist seam and secured it in place with a few stitches. Just a note, in the manual I describe another cleaner finish of attaching the lower waist tie, but this one is fine as well. Repeat the same for the other side, and then you also top stitch the press everything very well. It always makes a huge difference the way a garment is pressed. And then you're done, finally. Woohoo! I really hope you enjoyed today's video. I love to see your makes. That's always the best part for me. So feel free to send me pictures or tag me on Instagram. And if you have any questions or feedback, leave them in the comments. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel and my newsletter if you like. And I hope to see you soon. So now I show you how to attach a sleeve. This is the sleeve pattern piece, and we start by hemming it. It's the same method as we did with the half circle skirt. So sew a line parallel to the lower edge, 5 millimeter distance, and then we fold it towards the wrong side, press it and fold it again by another 5 millimeters, and then we top stitch. Now we place the sleeve right sides together, aligning the shoulder points. and pin it to the front and back piece, making sure that everything lays nice and flat on both sides. Then we sew from one end to the other end. Depending on the finishing option you choose, so visible bias binding or a clean finish as we did before, you press the seam allowance either towards the inside or towards the sleeve. As we are doing the contrasting, so the visible option here, we press it towards the sleeve. The top has the bias binding as visible finish. We also don't need any extra waist ties, so we finish it the same way as before, but also leave a 45 centimeter tie at the back piece as well. So it's the same method of finishing the curved edges, but this way we're also enclosing the seam allowance of the sleeves. Press everything again, and then we're gonna top stitch from the right side and secure the sleeve to the bias binding. And that's it. Repeat on the other side, and now you manage to attach the sleeves as well.